iGlobe News brings global views.
Welcome to another edition of iGlobe News Pods. If you like what you hear, please do not forget to like, subscribe, and follow. This interview can be found on our YouTube channel and on our website at www.iglobenews.org. Joining me today to discuss the ongoing war between Israel and the Palestinians is His Excellency Ambassador Salah Abdel Shafi, Ambassador of Palestine to Austria and Slovenia. Let me start by introducing you to our audience. You were born in Gaza and studied economics at the University for Economics in Berlin. Your professional career took you from the World Bank to being the PLO representative and delegate of Palestine in Stockholm, Sweden. After serving as the ambassador and head of the Palestinian diplomatic mission in Germany, you were appointed in 2013 as the Palestinian ambassador to Austria and as the permanent observer of the State of Palestine to the UN and international organizations based in Vienna. As of 2014, you also serve as the Palestinian ambassador to Slovenia. You live in Vienna, and in addition to Arabic and English, you are fluent in German. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ambassador.
Thank you for having me.
At least 35,800 people have been killed, and over 80,000 have been wounded in Israeli attacks on Gaza since October 7th. The revised death toll in Israel from Hamas's October 7th attacks stand at 1,139, with dozens of people still held captive. The chief prosecutor of the ICC, the world's top crimes court, sought arrest warrants this past Monday for leaders of Israel and Hamas, including Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, over actions taken during the seventh-month war. Israel and the US have strongly condemned this. France, Belgium, and Slovakia support the ICC. How are the Palestinians reacting to this ICC announcement?
Well, we definitely welcome this development because international law and international humanitarian human rights law should apply to everybody. And that's why there was, after the Second World War, a rule-based international system. It is a system that is supposed to protect people, to hold countries and individuals accountable for breaches of the international law and the international humanitarian law, and to not allow any country to act in impunity. We've been calling all along for various international institutions, like the ICC, the ICJ, the UN, to hold Israel accountable for crimes committed in the occupied Palestinian territories. And that's why finally, we are relieved that the chief prosecutor issued or applied for an arrest warrant against Prime Minister Netanyahu and his defense minister Gallant. However, and let me assure you, we respect whatever decisions come out of the court. The State of Palestine is a member of the ICC. We are co-signers. We are a state party to the Rome Statute that created that constitutes the basis, the legal basis for the ICC. And that's why we respect all rulings and decisions by the ICC. However, there are some shortcomings by this decision of the chief prosecutor. First of all, while he spoke in his statement about the right of Israel to defend for self-defense, he did not mention the right of people under occupation to resist occupation. Second, the chief prosecutor issued or applied for 2 arrest warrants just for Netanyahu and Gallant. We think there are enough ground for additional arrest warrants, like Chief of Staff of the Israeli Army, the commanders of the various military units of the Israeli armies that committed and still committing the atrocities. And number 3, we've referred many files to the chief prosecutor with regard of acts of terror by Israeli extremist settlers in the occupied West Bank. And settlements, according to the Rome Statute, is a war crime. And settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory is nothing secret. It's an official policy of the State of Israel. That's why we were expecting that based on this fact that the chief prosecutor would issue arrest warrants against the leaders and the government of Israel. But nevertheless, despite all these reservations, we highly respect the rulings of the court.
You mentioned the West Bank. I was going to discuss that somewhat later, but I could already ask that question now. Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's far-right minister of national security, has pushed loose gun regulations after the Hamas attack of 7th of October. Ben-Gvir passed amendments to the gun licensing requirements aimed at expanding eligibility and speeding the process of issuing a license. The rules benefit Jewish settlers in the West Bank in particular, since the eligibility favors towns deemed dangerous and beyond the Green Line of 1967. For non-Jews, it is almost impossible to get a gun license. Since October 7th, more than 120,000 people have applied for a gun license in Israel. And since October 7th, of course, the settler violence against Palestinians in the West Bank has sharply risen. And many have died and have been injured and have been put in prison. My question to you is, what are your views on Israel arming the Jewish settlers in the Palestinian territory?
Well, again, Israel is continuing with a policy of not only illegally creating of Jewish settlements. I would even accurately say not settlements, I would say colonies. Because in English, settlements have somehow a positive connotation. These are colonies. An occupying power, according to the Fourth Geneva Convention, is not allowed to bring its own population and settle them in the territory of the occupied land. So basically, what Israel is doing is a grave violation of international law. So settlers are not only, we have an apartheid system in the West Bank, because we have two legal systems. One civil applies to Israeli settlers, and one military that applies to Palestinians. There are roads only to the exclusive use of settlers. Palestinians are not allowed to drive in these roads. So if this is not apartheid, I don't know what apartheid is. So add to this what Minister Ben-Gvir, who is himself a settler. By the way, yesterday he declared, he said, I would be the first person to live in a settlement in the Gaza Strip.
Yes,
So add to this that Ben-Gvir is arming tens of thousands of illegal Jewish settlers on Palestinian territory. Where will this lead us? I'm afraid that if the international community does not step in and step in immediately, we might see a more horrific developments in the West Bank than what we have been seeing until today in Gaza. This is a country, Israel, that claims to be a democracy, that is distributing weapons to tens of thousands of illegal settlers. This is a very frightening situation. So that's why we're urging the international community to step in. Stop providing diplomatic support. Stop giving Israel weapons. Stop protecting Israel in international fora, not only for the sake of Palestinians, but also for the sake of Israelis, for the sake of the region at large, and for the sake of the world at large. Listen, we've been, before the eruption of the Gaza genocidal war, the issue of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict somehow disappeared from the international agenda. And politicians were telling us, the Middle East, there is Iraq, there is Syria, there is Libya, there is Yemen, you name it. And I personally used to tell my counterparts in Europe, to tell them, it is true, the Middle East has many conflicts, but you can solve all of them. Only one conflict, it is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, is the conflict that has the potential to destabilize the whole region and beyond. Today's development are proving us right in this assessment. This is a conflict that is threatening not only the Middle East, it has implications on the world. The hundreds of thousands of young people going to the streets in Europe, in the United States, show that this conflict has to be solved for the sake of the world, not only for the sake of Israelis and Palestinians.
You mentioned that this has the possibility of engulfing the wider Middle East. There have been reports and articles that Israel has taken over Egyptian territory at the Rafah crossing and hissed the Israeli flag. Is this fake news or is this real news? And if it's true, this might explain Egypt's recent statement that Israel has crossed a red line and they have threatened to suspend the Camp David Accords, a cornerstone of regional stability for half a century. Has the danger of an escalation just increased exponentially? And what will happen if Egypt becomes militarily involved?
Well, again, it's becoming more and more obvious that the leaders of Israel, particularly Benjamin Netanyahu, is not interested in de-escalation. He's rather interested in further escalation, not only with Egypt, but also with Lebanon, with Iran. And, guess what? He knows very well the moment this war ends, it will be the end of his political career. There will be investigations inside Israel, and he will be held accountable inside Israel for what happened on the 7th of October. That's why Benjamin Netanyahu is not interested in putting an end to the genocidal war. He's rather interested in escalation. Egypt is the biggest Arab country and the first Arab country to sign a peace agreement with Israel. So the fact that Israel is provoking, I'm not sure about the news, whether the news are fake or not, but definitely Israel is taking things to the edge. The fact that Egypt declared that they're going to join South Africa in the ICJ in the claim against the case of genocide is a first step, is a first response by Egypt towards Israel. It is basically a message telling the Israelis, don't mess up with us. So again, I am saying it is for the sake of security of the whole region. Netanyahu should be stopped and not encouraged, because unfortunately we still see certain countries are still very loyal to the Israeli position.
Yes, and at this moment, we're waiting now for the ICJ to issue its ruling. It hasn't come out yet. I keep checking; it hasn't been posted yet. But the UN Special Rapporteur on Occupied Palestinian Territories, Francesca Albanese, issued a report titled "Anatomy of a Genocide," concluding that there are, quote, reasonable grounds to believe that the threshold indicating the commission of the crime of genocide has been met. And she concludes that, quote, Israel's genocide on the Palestinians in Gaza is an escalatory stage of a long-standing settler colonial process of erasure. Israel, of course, has called the report a, quote, perversion of reality. But interestingly, she also has a list of recommendations that she has put forward in her report, which include an arms embargo on Israel, support of South Africa's ICJ case, a thorough independent investigation, including ICC involvement, which we see happening now, reparations by Israel and those countries supporting Israel, a special UN committee against apartheid, UN troops and personnel on the ground to protect the Palestinians, and the UNRWA. What do you think of this list of suggestions that Albanese has made?
I cannot agree more with this list. We need practical steps to force Israel to stop its genocide in Gaza. It is not enough to criticize. It's not enough at all to criticize Israel. And I think if there is a political will on the side of the international community, they can stop this war. Nobody can really convince me that it's impossible from a distance to stop this war. The United States of America, Germany, and other countries are providing weapons, are providing financial assistance, are providing ammunition, are providing diplomatic support to Israel, are engaging in all kinds of cooperation agreements with Israel, with from economic into research into security agreements. So the world has so many instruments at its disposal to use to pressure Israel to stop this genocidal war. And if the world doesn't use these instruments, this war will not end. We will still see the genocide happening in front of our eyes. This is the first genocide in history that is being broadcast live on TV stations. Nobody today, nobody can claim we did not know. After the horrors of the Holocaust, many in the countries of the perpetrators, whether it's Germany or Austria particularly, claimed we didn't know what happened. Today, nobody can claim we didn't know. It is live on TV stations. That's why the international community has to take practical measures. And when I say international community, I have to be fair. There are certain countries that have leverage. I mean, I don't compare the United States of America with, say, with Ireland or with Spain or with even with Austria. You know, the Americans have leverage. They provide money, ammunition, weapons, diplomatic protection, economic agreements, and so on. But also Europe can play a very, very important role. Listen, Israel has an association agreement with the European Union. The preamble of this agreement, as with all EU association agreements with all countries, it says a precondition is the respect of international law and human rights. So that's why the European Union can suspend the association agreement. The EU is the biggest trading partner of Israel, not only in terms of weapons are the Americans, but economically speaking. The association agreement between the EU and Israel ranges from agreements on trade, on customs, through research and academic cooperation, until it goes to security cooperation and cooperation in the space. So basically, the European Union has so many instruments at their disposal to be able to influence Israeli policy. So that's why I fully agree with the measures that Francesca Albanese proposed. Second, the Palestinian people need protection. We've been calling for protection. We are standing against one of the most brutal occupations of modern history. We're standing in front of a country that has the fourth strongest army in the world, that is, as we said earlier, that is arming its settlers. So the Palestinian people we need protection. And so that's why we very much welcome such a recommendation of having a UN protection for the Palestinian people until there is a political solution. We need today protection in the West Bank and in Gaza. So again, I fully agree with these conclusions and recommendations by Albanese.
I think that was also one of the questions the German judge asked at the ICJ, how Israel foresees the evacuation of Rafah, how that can be done safely, and where these people, and I think there are millions there, where they are actually supposed to go, because that's where they were told to go in the first place. And these mass evacuations by Israel are justified by labeling the civilians as human shields and accomplices of terrorism. Is an evacuation of millions of Palestinians under these circumstances even possible? And where can these people safely go?
Well, these people in Rafah, they were evacuated from Gaza City and the north. So they left to the middle area. And I know personally, family members, friends, they left Gaza City. They went to the middle area, Khan Yunis, Deir el-Balah, and then to Rafah. And then they're asking them to go back. Now, many of them, 80% of their houses were completely destroyed. So they have no place. There is no capacity in UNRWA school, in UN schools. There are no more tents available. Listen, we lost our house, our family house in the Gaza City was completely destroyed. And we have pictures. People send us pictures of our demolished and destroyed house. So even if you want these people to go back where? It is literally, there is no safe place in Gaza. People are cramped like sardines in tents. And Gaza was already, before the genocidal war, the mostly the densely populated area in the world. So imagine, 1.5 million squeezed in Rafah. I don't know, probably Rafah is as big as the 19th district of Vienna, the whole city. So again, I mean, these are criminal acts. This is genocide par excellence. What is happening? They've destroyed hospitals. There is no water. There is no electricity. There are no roads. There is nothing. Basically, Gaza is unlivable today. And still, we see countries, are still justifying what Israel is doing. It's incomprehensible in the 21st century that politicians, responsible politicians, are still seeking for, justifications for Israel. And let me tell you something. Even if these countries think that what happened on the 7th of October is the most horrible thing, but even a genocide does not justify a genocide. Definitely, and to go back to the 7th of October, and when I was asked from day one, I said, any attacks of civilians, regardless of from which side, is against international law, against international humanitarian law, and those who commit these things should be held accountable, whether they're Palestinians or Israelis. But even again, if the most horrible thing in history happened on the 7th of October, does not justify what is happening today in Gaza.
Yes, I mean, the terrorist attack of the 7th of October, and I think this is also the conclusion that the ICJ and the ICC have come to, do not legitimize a so-called self-defense of killings of hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of people at the moment, but no end in sight where this might end. And on top of that, of course, we're having the daily pictures of this incredible destruction, which is brought to us more or less live through social media, through news channels. And we know now from the UN that there is a widespread famine in Gaza. They talked of a widespread famine in northern Gaza, but maybe it's even spread to all of Gaza. And videos can be seen of Israelis who are blocking roads with boulders, attacking trucks, slitting tires, and destroying supplies so they don't reach Gaza. On the other hand, I have seen videos of Israelis who are trying to put those supplies back in the trucks because they want to get those supplies to the people in Gaza. But I think that might be the minority of them. So my question to you is, how many people are now in acute danger of starving to death? And will that port that the US has built have any significant effect in bringing humanitarian aid into Gaza?
Well, again, I mean, according to UN figures, the whole population is at risk of famine. Acute, probably we're speaking about a bit less than 1 million people. So basically, this is a very, very extremely serious situation. And from day one, Israel, the Israeli army was preventing help convoys, humanitarian assistance convoys from entering into the Gaza Strip. Before the war, there used to be 500 trucks per day entering the Gaza Strip, bringing all kinds of food stuff, water, medical supplies, things necessary for a functioning of a society. Now, we had days when zero number of trucks were able to enter Gaza. And despite, a big outcry in the international community, despite promises by the American administration, Israel is still not letting, probably per day, around 40 to 50 trucks are entering Gaza, which is basically nothing, which is really a drop of water. So again, the issue for how long is the world is going to tolerate this? For how long will Israel continue to act in impunity? And let me tell you something. Supposedly, today Benjamin Netanyahu says, okay, the war is over. Will he be held accountable, or he will be praised? Wow, great, he stopped the war. See, this is really the issue today. It is not only stopping the war, it is holding people accountable. The Europe today is challenged. After the issue of the ICC, the application for arrest warrants, I saw the comment of the Chancellor of Austria and the comment of the spokesperson of the German foreign ministry. Both of them said, how can you? Israel is a democracy. How can you put Israel and Hamas in the first place? Come on, give me a break. Being a democracy, if at all, I don't agree that Israel is a democracy, but even if Israel is a democracy, does not give you immunity. And by the way, these politicians, Chancellor Nehammer, should be reminded that Hitler was democratically elected. And the Germans should be reminded that Hitler was democratically elected. So elected officials does not mean they're immune to accountability. So again, it is today a challenge for Europe. Will Europe respect once there are arrest warrants? And I am pretty confident that there will be arrest warrants. Will they respect this? I still have some question marks on this. We know other countries, of course, said, of course, we will respect. And if Israel, if these politicians, land in our countries, we will arrest them. But again, this will be a test, because today, really, the question is there a rule-based international system, or we have a system that is based on power policy? I'm afraid what we're seeing today is the collapse of a rule-based international system. International law is not a menu, pick and choose. Either it's applicable everywhere, or there will be the rule of the jungle and not a rule-based international system.
Yes, that's very true what you say. And I think many people are pointing also in the West to the reaction after Russia invaded Ukraine, and now the reaction of the West to what Israel is doing to the civilians in Gaza. With regard to Austria and Germany, I think they have this burden from their past, but that still does not excuse to call out when you see what's happening, to call it out as it is. So I can agree with you on that for sure. Rule-based order means the rules apply to everyone the same. Otherwise, it's not a rule-based order anymore. And which leads me to my next point, namely that Israel has been repeatedly attacking aid workers. It targeted UNRWA, saying that they were closely connected to Hamas. So my question to you in that connection is, has that actually been determined by UNRWA that there were connections with Hamas? But then also Israel has bombed UNRWA buildings in Gaza on the 6th of May and on the 9th of May. The perimeter of the UNRWA headquarters were bombed or were attacked in East Jerusalem. So is there actually any other organization that can fulfill the duty of this UN organization in Palestine, in Gaza?
Yeah, well, first of all, again, this is one of the tragic things that Israel has been consistently attacking, international organizations, not only Palestinian health infrastructure, but has been attacking UNRWA schools where people were seeking refuge. They were attacked the UNRWA headquarters. They killed aid workers. First of all, let me say something to UNRWA. First, Israel could not substantiate any of its claims that 12 members or 12 workers of UNRWA were participating in the 7th of October attacks. They could not substantiate this. Second, there was an independent investigation or a committee headed by the former French foreign minister, which issued a report saying that there is no proof that UNRWA is cooperating with Hamas. UNRWA has 12,000 workers, mostly Palestinians. And UNRWA, just for the sake of viewers or listeners, is not just an agency like any other UN agency. UNRWA is providing health services, educational services, municipal services in refugee camps. And UNRWA was created after the Nakba. The Nakba is the catastrophe of the Palestinian people when Palestinians, more than half of the Palestinian population, were expelled of their country in 1948 in the course of the creation of the State of Israel. And UNRWA was created by a General Assembly resolution. And according to the resolution, the mandate of UNRWA is continuously being renewed until there is a political solution to the refugees problem. So until there is no solution, such a solution, the UNRWA exists to provide vital services to Palestinian refugees, not only, by the way, in Gaza and the West Bank and East Jerusalem, but also in neighboring countries, in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Syria. These are the main fields of operation of UNRWA. And that's why no other UN agency can really overtake the role of UNRWA. UNRWA has the infrastructure, has the experience of more than 75 years, have all the ingredients that will enable UNRWA to continue providing much needed services for refugees in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. So basically, no other organization can really substitute UNRWA in that thing.
Thank you for that. It just came in. I believe the ICJ has ordered Israel to stop its offensive in Rafah. I just got that message here.
Yeah.
Do you think that's going to make any difference for the Israeli offensive?
I'm afraid not. I'm afraid not. I mean, well in advance, Israel said that they will not really stop, even if the ICJ issued an order to stop the offensive in Rafah. I personally, I was hoping that the court would order a total stop of the war. But regardless, I don't think Israel will respect this. But this will put the United States in a very awkward position. Again, the question, do we respect the International Court of Justice? All the countries, including Israel, is a member of the court. The United States is a member of the court. Today is the challenge, really. Today, it is not only about Gaza. Really, the credibility of the international system at large is at stake. Again, I was always wondering that since the 7th of October, these hundreds of thousands of young people taking to the streets day in, day out, in the United States, in Europe, Gaza is becoming a symbol of injustice in the world. This is a generation that is worried about its future. This is a generation that sees injustice everywhere and sees the injustice in Gaza. And that's why it is a big challenge to the international community. Put Gaza aside. It is a challenge. Do we want to have a rule-based international system? Do we want to have international law and international humanitarian law? Or we don't want this? So this is really, again, back to the ICJ ruling. We know that Israel is not going to respect this. And by this, by the way, I think Israel is officially, for me, is a pariah state. There is no other description for such a state. No other state on the face of this earth. Israel, by the way, holds the record of the number of violated United Nations General Assembly and Security Council resolutions or non-compliance with these resolutions. Israel holds the record worldwide. And again, Israel will not respect the ICC, will not respect the ICJ. And by this, Israel, for me, officially is pariah state.
So having said that, do you think that there is a chance of peace as long as Israel continues attacking Rafah? And what is the current state of talks between Israel and Hamas?
Well, since yesterday, according to the news, that there is a resumption of negotiations on the issue of hostages and ceasefire. And now I don't want to be overly optimistic, but realistically speaking, I really don't see, in the coming days, a breakthrough in these negotiations. Again, if the Americans want these negotiations to conclude, we remember last week, the Americans put forward the proposal, and they said, it's up to Hamas to take it or leave it. Hamas took it, and Hamas approved and said that's fine. And Netanyahu was the one who rejected this. So again, if we leave things only to Israel, nothing will happen. If there is a serious effort on the side of the Americans, I think we can see progress on that area.
Why did Israel reject it?
I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, I read or what was leaked of the proposal because Israel want to have a constant military presence in the Gaza Strip, in certain areas of the Gaza Strip. And Hamas is insisting on a phased withdrawal. Of course, Hamas is not requesting an immediate withdrawal of all Israeli forces from Gaza, but it is proposing a phased withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza to reach a permanent ceasefire. But it seems that Netanyahu, just to appease his ministers, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, you see, Netanyahu knows very well that he is subject to blackmailing. And if these or I would call them the fascist elements in his government, because he is extreme right wing already, but the fascist elements in his government, if they leave the coalition, the government will collapse. So that's why Netanyahu is always concerned about this and want always to appease them.
So he's holding on to power by all means.
Absolutely. This is the issue.
There have been grave reports coming out. The first one I wanted to discuss with you was the mass graves that have been found in Gaza. I think there are 4, but maybe there are more, 3 of which are next to hospitals, and 1 is next to an Israeli checkpoint. And according to reports, up to 500 bodies have been buried in these mass graves. Can you tell us more about these graves? Who are the people who have been buried there? Do we know how they've been killed? What could you share with us? And what is the state of medical facilities in Gaza in general?
Well, first of all, there are 10,000 people missing in Gaza, not accounted for. And of course, we assume that these people are all of them. Some of them are in mass graves, others are under the rubble. Just let me give you an example of not accounted for. My cousin and her daughter, she was 76 years old, her daughter was 46 years old, living in a house in Gaza. In their house, they refused to evacuate when the war started, the Gaza city, and stayed in their house. They survived the first wave of Israeli incursion into the Gaza city. The second wave, when Israeli forces entered the Gaza city again in order, to attack the Shifa hospital, troops and Israeli tanks came, in the area where she used to live. Soldiers knocked on her door, asked her and her daughter to leave the house because the soldiers told them that they're going to destroy their house and they have to leave. And she asked them to leave where? There's shooting everywhere. And they gave her a map with arrows pointing to a certain road. They told them, you just follow these arrows and you will be fine. The soldiers told them. So they left. We know this information because after they left the house, she called her daughter who lives in Istanbul. She called her and told her the story. And she said, well, we don't know. We are now walking. That was the last time we had contact with them, with her and her daughter. 9 days later, when the troops pulled out of that area, her daughter called one of the neighbors and asked him to go around, ask if they saw her mother, and they found her and her daughter 500 meters away from the house in pieces. Literally, the neighbor collected them in pieces, and he made photos of this, collected them in pieces, put them in a plastic bag. And by the way, their house was not destroyed. He buried them in the garden of their house. He recognized them from their ID cards. They were carrying their ID cards with them. He did not inform Ministry of Health of anybody. So they're not accounted for. I'm telling you this to show you an example of people are dying somewhere and neighbors or relatives are burying them without reporting this. So we have this category of people, died, buried, nobody knows about them except neighbors or relatives. We have like the example of that you spoke about, the mass graves that were discovered at the Shifa hospital in Gaza City, at the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis, and at the checkpoints. Hundreds of bodies of women, children, old men, some of them tied on their backs. So this is the second category. And the third category, people who are under the rubble. There is no equipment. You see on TV stations, people with their bare hands try to search for survivors under the rubble. So these are the, and what I am really wondering, if I watch, if I read media in Austria or watch TV, nobody's speaking about these mass graves. I remember the outcry in the world at the beginning of the Ukraine war in Bucha. The outcry in the world community, about the atrocities and all this. Nobody is speaking about hundreds of dead bodies, children, women, old men in mass graves in Gaza. Where are we? What kind of a world are we in? What kind of a mindset of politicians who are silent towards these atrocities? It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
Well, not only politicians, what kind of a human can remain silent with the stories that
Absolutely.
you're telling me?
Yeah.
As you're telling me the story, I'm like crying inside. It's just so sad. Trying not to show it, but it's really affecting me a lot, what you're telling me. And you're completely right. The reporting, especially on Austrian state television, has been absolutely atrocious. And the Germans have become somewhat better over time. So if you watch German television, it has gotten better as the weeks have progressed. But I must say Austria has not changed its tune since the beginning. And it makes me as an Austrian actually very embarrassed and sad that this is how they're acting. But as we know, controlling the narrative is an essential part of waging a war. And Israel hasn't stopped in targeting journalists. I think they've killed about 143. They killed Shireen Abu Akleh 2 years ago. And now they've gone on to kill 143 other journalists. They passed a special media law. They kicked Al Jazeera out. And now they've confiscated cameras and broadcast equipment of Associated Press because they didn't like the reporting that they were doing. Can you tell us more about this, and how safe is it to be a journalist now in Gaza?
Well, first of all, it is absolutely not safe to be a journalist. And that's why journalists in Gaza deserve recognition, because they are becoming the voice of the people. They're becoming the voice of the voiceless. They are broadcasting at the expense of their own lives. And as you just said, over 140 journalists were killed and brutally murdered in Gaza. So being a journalist is an act of heroism in Gaza, and simply because Israel is not allowing foreign journalists to enter Gaza. So again, this is also something where the world is silent about, where mainstream media is silent about. The fact that Israel is preventing foreign journalists from entering Gaza and deliberately targeting journalists. Journalists are clearly marked. They have their helms, they have their vests. It says press very clear on them. But again, we can say many things. The problem is Israel has all along been acting with impunity. Israel is the darling of the international community, is the spoiled child of the international community. But this is the result. When you allow Israel to act in impunity, when you treat Israel as if Israel above the law, all along, since the creation of the state of Israel, this is the result. It's like, a spoiled child in your house. If you spoiled your child, they do whatever they want to do. And this is exactly what is happening with Israel. They've been spoiled in the international community. And that's why all of a sudden they're shocked that their leaders are accused of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity, that this state is accused of committing genocide in Gaza. They just don't want to comprehend this fact because they have been spoiled all along. So again, journalists, aid workers, and of course, let alone the tens of thousands of other Palestinian civilians. I remember when the 7 workers of the what is it called, the Central Kitchen,
World Kitchen.
World Central Kitchen were killed. Of course, this it's a very, very sad thing, and we are very thankful as Palestinians for all the aid workers who risk their lives and come in, whether aid workers or medical workers who enter into Gaza, Europeans, North Americans, all kinds of nationalities. But the outcry in the world, because 7 workers, British, majority British, but no outcry because of 15,000 children, Palestinian children. The world was asking for investigations and so on. What is this? I'm speechless. Sorry.
Yes, no. You're quite right to point to the hypocrisy, especially of many Western nations. Not all Western nations, but many. But not all the people in the Western nations. There are many people in the West who really see what's right and do see what's wrong. And we hope that iGlobe News will help spread more truth about what's going on there. We just published actually an article, which is our lead article, about Israel using lethal autonomous weapons and killer robots targeting civilians in Palestine. And now that you mentioned these, the World Aid Kitchen, it's really interesting how such a highly sophisticated and, as you said, the 4th most powerful army in the world could make such an egregious mistake when it was labeled on the top of its car, on the side of its car. It was very hard not to see who was sitting in that car. But I just wanted to make that point. Which brings me to another report, which was published on CNN on 11th of May. And the title of the report was "Strapped Down, Blindfolded, Held in Diapers, Israeli Whistleblowers Detail Abuse of Palestinians in Shadowy Detention Center." And the report documents how CNN spoke to 3 Israeli whistleblowers who work at the Stay Taiman desert camp. And this camp is being called a concentration camp where Palestinians are tortured and held in inhumane conditions. And the reports of abuse at this Stay Taiman have already surfaced in Israeli and Arab media, but this was really the first time that the Western world was confronted with these horrible reports. Stay Taiman and other military detention camps have been shrouded in secrecy since their inception, and Israel has repeatedly refused requests to disclose the number of detainees held at these facilities or to reveal their whereabouts or the whereabouts of Gazan prisoners. Do you know about these camps, and what can you tell us about them?
Well, I know personally one case of a distant relative of mine, 79 years old. He was arrested by the Israeli army in Al-Bureij refugee camp. Next to it, he has a house there. And he was taken to this camp. 40 days he was taken. 79 years old, cancer patient. In the 40 days, these plastic handcuffs, I don't know what you call them, were not removed. 40 days he was in handcuffs. And then he was brought back when they found that there is nothing, about this old man, 79 years old. They brought him back to Gaza, crossed the border, and left him to walk. Luckily, he managed to walk and find some refuge. I know this story from his wife and from his children who are outside Gaza. Yes, there is this concentration camp, and nobody can really claim that CNN is anti-Israel or anti-Semitic or creating fake news. No, these news are very credible. The information is very credible. And by the way, the human rights rapporteur on prisoners issues issued yesterday a statement on this particular aspect, asking for an international investigation on crimes committed by Israel against prisoners. Again, the injustice of the world. People are speaking about the 133 or 39 Israeli hostages, but they're silent about 8,000 Palestinian prisoners and hostages, including children and women. This is really the injustice in the world. While the whole world is speaking about the 133 or 38 hostages with Hamas, mainstream media, politicians are not speaking about Palestinian hostages and what they are going through in such concentration camps.
I think by now everyone must have heard, maybe not everything we're talking about, but many of these facts are out there. They're in social media. It's not so hard to be informed if you want to be informed. So I'd like to talk now about Palestine's road to becoming a full member of the United Nations. So far, the US has been blocking that full membership, but there was a vote by the General Assembly, and only 9 states voted against that vote. Those states being United States, Israel, Argentina, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Micronesia, Nauru, Palau, and Papua New Guinea. So except for a few countries there, we're not talking about such heavyweights, no offense intended. There were 25 abstentions. What additional rights did Palestine receive as a result of this overwhelming positive vote? What are the next steps Palestine will take to be accepted as a full member of the UN? And how can international organizations aid Palestine to achieve this goal?
Well, this is relatively a long story. We started our quest to become full members of the United Nations already around 2010, like 14 years ago. And of course, we were always faced with a severe rejection and objection from the side of the Americans and some other countries. That led us to go to the United Nations General Assembly in 2012 and apply to become a non-member observer state. And with an overwhelming majority, we got this status as a non-member observer state. And according to international law, an observer state is a state. So basically, since that date, it was the 29th of November 2012, the official designation is State of Palestine in the UN system. But also, this enabled us becoming a non-member observer. By the way, the Federal Republic of Germany and the German Democratic Republic were non-member observer states until, I think, 1974. Switzerland was until the beginning of 2000 and something, also by choice, a non-member observer state. But nevertheless, all of them were states, recognized states. So again, being a non-member observer state opened the door wide for us to become state parties to many international conventions and to become full members in many UN agencies. So we became members of UNESCO in Paris. Palestine is a full member of Interpol. In Vienna, we are a full member of the United Nations Industrial Development Program, and so on and so forth. In addition to the tens of international conventions where Palestine really signed as a state party. Of course, being a non-member observer state, to it there are certain privileges attached. Of course, you cannot run for office in the United Nations, and you don't have the right to vote. Now, the new General Assembly resolution gave Palestine, or the state of Palestine, additional privileges as an observer state. It did not change the status of being an observer, but added to it basically all the privileges that states enjoy, with the exception of being able to vote and run for office. But otherwise, the state of Palestine now has all the privileges, even in the listing, for example, in Vienna, as an observer in conferences, we come after the last member state if I want to deliver a statement. So even this now, with the new resolution, Palestine can enlist on the list of speaker according to the order of precedence, or according to alphabet, and so on. So this is a step further. Of course, becoming a full member state, you have to get a recommendation from the Security Council. You have to have at least 9 yes votes and no veto.
No veto.
So we know very well, no veto. Yeah, we know very well that the Americans would veto. They vetoed this already. I think it was last month or 2 months ago. And that's why we went back to the General Assembly, and the resolution, which upgraded our status, also referred back the issue to the Security Council, asking the Security Council to look favorably to a full membership of Palestine. If you ask me why we're doing this, we want to challenge the Americans. We want to show the Americans, the United States of America, they're becoming more and more internationally isolated on that question. You just said 9 countries only voted against. This shows how isolated internationally the United States is becoming. Even in the Security Council, countries that traditionally would vote like the Americans, like the British or the French, the British abstained, the French voted in favor. So basically, we want to show the whole world how isolated internationally the United States is.
And I think this vote made it abundantly clear that that's the case. My final question has to do with the 33rd Arab Summit in Bahrain, which just took place. The leaders of the Arab countries called for, quote, the deployment of international protection and peacekeeping forces of the United Nations in the occupied Palestinian territories until the two-state solution is implemented, end of quote. The so-called Bahrain Declaration emphasized the Arab leaders' support for an international peace conference. Representative from Iran and the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council were present at the meeting. So my final question to you is, what is your opinion on this initiative, and can this be a solution to the war in Gaza?
Definitely, it can be a solution. When we speak about peacekeeping forces, international or any other kind of peacekeeping forces, it should be keep peacekeeping forces in all of the occupied Palestinian territories, meaning West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza. We are against any separation between Gaza and the West Bank. Gaza and the West Bank constitute territories of the Palestinian state. And we accept only solutions that include both areas. And we are asking, as I said in the beginning, for international protection. So we would welcome any presence of peacekeeping forces, international, UN, peacekeeping, until there is a political solution. Of course, we have tried bilateral negotiations with Israel. And let me tell you what the problem with bilateral negotiations was and why we're asking today for an international peace conference. Bilateral negotiations can only function when there is symmetry between the parties. The dilemma of previous negotiations with Israel is the existing asymmetry. We have it with an occupation power that, by the virtue of its military power, was dictating things on the ground, while Israel negotiated with us and creating the impression that there is peace. They continued with a policy of land confiscation and establishment of illegal Jewish colonies on our territory. So that after 20 years of negotiations, we woke up one day and we said, where are we going to have our state? It's already occupied. So again, that's why the asymmetry between the parties, in this case, Israel and Palestine, will not lead to a solution through bilateral negotiations. That's why we need an international leverage. The best would be a UN under the auspices of the United Nations to have a conference and reach an agreement on solving the conflict. Let me say the following. Although most of the people say, oh, this is a very complex conflict. No, I said rarely in history there was a consensus on a solution like the consensus on solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Everybody is speaking about the two-state solution. The Americans, the Europeans, the Russians, the Chinese, the Japanese, you name it, everybody speaks about the two-state solution. And not only about the two-state, everybody knows the parameters of such a solution. You know, the territories that Israel occupied in 1967 should become the territories of the future Palestinian state. Jerusalem should be a capital of two states. Settlements are illegal and against international. So there are also agreement internationally on the parameters of the solution. But still, the conflict persists despite this international consensus. And the answer to this, yes, it persists because the world is allowing Israel to act in impunity. Because the world is treating Israel as a state above the law. That's why, despite the agreement on the solution, there is no solution so far.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your candid words and for taking so much time to talk to us. Is there any other issue that you would like to discuss before we end our interview?
Maybe I should speak one last sentence on the countries that recently recognized Palestine or declared that they're going to recognize Palestine. Ireland,
Yes.
Spain, and Norway from Europe. And I think it is long overdue, but it's a very welcome development because you cannot, as the Austrian government, say we are in favor of the two-state solution, but we recognize only one state. If you support the two-state solution, you should recognize the two states and not only one. Thank you.
Very well said. Very well said. Thank you very much, Ambassador
Thank you
Salah.
for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for your interview. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure.